Thank you, Stu, and thank you, Ivan. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Here is the agenda for my presentation. So firstly, going to provide you with a short overview of VFTP and SSH tech tier. Thereafter, I plan to log on to the VFTP user interface to show you how you can identify and view all of your mainframe traffic, so all of your mainframe FTPs, both inbound and outbound from the mainframe. Then after that, I'd like to provide you with a demo to show you how you can migrate your existing FTP batch jobs to SFTP. My plan is to show you a regular FTP batch job, then use that same batch job and show you how I've converted it to use SFTP command syntax. So just to show you if that's something that you're considering converting your regular batch jobs from FTP command syntax to SFTP, show you some of the changes that is required. And then lastly, to show you the real highlight of the two solutions, so that's VFTP and SSH tech tier working together, how you can migrate your batch jobs without making any JCL changes using the SSH SOCKS proxy. Lastly, we'd like to field some of those questions that you may have, so remember to place your questions in the Q&A box and we will answer them at the end of today's presentation. So firstly, a few questions about FTP activity at your site, and this is also touching on some of the items that Stu spoke about today. How do you identify, or can you identify, all of the FTP activity at your site? If somebody or your chief security officer came to you and said, can you give me a breakdown of the FTP traffic types on your site, would you be able to give them that information immediately? Or would you have to run some batch reports, extract SMF information in order to provide him with that breakdown? With VFTP, all of that information is at your fingertips. You can view this information almost immediately. How do you know which of your FTP transmissions are secure and which are unsecure? Do you know who is transferring data to and from your mainframe? Should these users have access to these data sets? Again, something that Stu raised when he spoke about FTP. We know that if you have read access to a data set, you can download this data set and the subsequent dissemination of that data. It's pretty much a free-for-all thereafter. If you're encrypting your FTPs, are you using correct ciphers? Are you using the most up-to-date ciphers? Is that something that you can identify? So certainly questions to ask yourself about FTP and also the visibility that you have with regard to all of your FTP at your site. So a short overview of vital signs for FTP, it provides you with that visibility I just spoke about. The complete visibility of all FTP transfers, whether it's FTP, FTPS, SFTP, both inbound and outbound transfers, you will get that visibility. It's a matter of pointing and clicking and getting the information that you require. Failed transfers, problem transfers, transfers from specific IP addresses. So all really easy to use, and I'll show you this when I log on to the VFTP user interface and run some of the queries. VFTP also has an automation component, something called FCL or FTP control language, which allows customers to code these statements within their batch jobs. So you can use statements like the if, then, do, and else. An example might be if a batch job or FTP step fails, you can write this automation to wait a couple of minutes, retry the operation. If that fails, then send a message out to the network team and also post a message on the system console to let people know that this critical batch job has failed. Certainly something that some of our customers use, but that is also available in the product. Then the auditing, it also has an auditing capability. You can retain all FTP transfers for a user-defined period. So on the actual user interface, you can say you'd like to keep FTP transfers for 2 years or 3 years, depending on what your requirement is. You can see the context of these FTP transfers and also the technical details. So if somebody came to you and said, we need to know what happened on the 1st of January 2015 between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning, simply go to the VFTP user interface, plug in the date and time, and you will have that information immediately. Nice utility that comes with the product from a reporting point of view is you can extract information from the database into an Excel spreadsheet, so using the comma delimiter format. I'm aware of a customer that used this particular piece of the product. They were running some queries, and they were amazed to see that there was almost 1 terabyte worth of FTPs that they were not aware of from their remote network. So what they did was they ran these reports, put it into an Excel spreadsheet to show to their managers or the management team, the extent of all of these FTP transfers. Lastly, VFTP does have a security component, so let's be clear about this. VFTP does not do the encryption that is performed by the SSH tier product. However, it does have some command security. So perhaps you want to control access to certain data sets. You can do that using the VFTP server exits. Perhaps you want to control access to the site command. Those are all very important, very powerful commands. So you can certainly control that using our VFTP server exits. And then also the VFTP client rules. That's what I will illustrate when I get to the demo. You can route batch jobs from this, any batch job. You've set it up on VFTP and you say, all right, batch job production 1, 2, 3, this particular batch job, when it runs, VFTP will automatically recognize that it's one of the rules inside of the VFTP client database. It'll then route that batch job to the SOX proxy, and the SOX proxy will convert it. And this is the no JCL changes that I was talking about. So there's many options to secure your FTP. We chat on a daily basis to our customers, and sometimes they've been mandated to migrate, or they've been told you need to get off regular FTP, unsecured FTP, and go to a more secure form of FTP. It's quite a huge subject. Sometimes customers are not exactly sure what the correct solution is for them, because as you know, there's different variances or different ways of doing this depending on what your requirement is. You could use SFTP, FTPS, PGP. In fact, if you want more information, there's a great tutorial on our website. It's called Peeling the Onion, and this tutorial goes into great detail on the different options available to customers. Gives you the pros and cons and when we think it's most appropriate to use some of these solutions. So if you want more details on it, certainly visit our website and you can view this tutorial. And again, it's called Peeling the Onion. So if you have been tasked to migrate to a secure form of FTP, where do you start? Do you know what you want to do? Do you have enough resources for this project? What are your end goals? Are you wanting to disable FTP completely at your site, or is there still some sort of requirement to run FTP on your mainframe? Certainly things to consider if you are going down this path, certainly things that we can help you with. It can also be pretty costly if you plan to convert your JCLs to SFTP. It can be time consuming. You will have to dedicate resources in order to do this conversion. And inevitably, whenever there's change, sometimes that can cause outages in your production environment. So just things to be aware of depending on what your end goal is. For today's purposes, though, I plan to talk about SFTP and how you can migrate your JCL, your batch jobs, from regular FTP to SFTP. All right, let's talk briefly about the SSH products. So remember, we're talking about two solutions and they're a combined solution, VFTP and SSH. I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with SSH. It's been around for a very long time. These are the inventors of the SSH protocol, and it is the de facto standard used by millions of folks worldwide for secure remote login, command execution, file transfer, and also application tunneling. There's a few features to note about the product: the transparent FTP to SFTP conversion and also FTP tunneling. So that's something that you can configure on the product depending on what your requirements are. Native dataset, ZOS or MVS dataset support, that's pretty important. I think there are some limitations on the regular OpenSSH. You have to store the file in a ZFS file system, and there is some staging, so you probably have to use some sort of ocopy command or some sort of automated routine if you want to copy the information from a ZFS into a MVS dataset. With SSH tier, you can specify or you can determine where you want the data where the data should reside. So using something called an FT advice string or file transfer advice string, you can dictate as to whether it should reside on a ZFS file system or directly on a ZOS dataset. It also does support the acceleration of crypto operations. Stu spoke about also the different types of FTP. If we're about to send from the mainframe to a Windows platform, for example, you want to make sure that you're sending it in the right format. Obviously, EPSIDIC will not work on a Windows platform. And also RACF, ACF2, and Top Secret are supported. Okay, so to wrap it up, talking about the two solutions together, how do they work? Firstly, when you install VFTP, you install it with our VFTP client wrapper, so that becomes the standard default client which gets invoked. So it wraps around the IBM FTP client. And I'll show you this when I do the demo, but essentially what happens is you can, on VFTP, on the user interface, you set up or you determine which batch jobs you want to be forced or migrated to the SOX proxy. So the SOX proxy will, when the batch job, let's assume there's a batch job called production 123, and bear in mind there's a lot of filter criteria that you can specify. When that batch job runs, VFTP will intercept it, route it to the SOX proxy, and the SOX proxy will do that conversion for you from FTP to SFTP. You do need some presence of SSH on the remote end. We all know by default AIX and Linux platforms, they do have SSH software installed on them. However, from a Windows point of view, you might have to look into that if your objective is to send files from the mainframe to a Windows platform. There are different modes of authentication, and this is all configurable on the product. You can set it up to use password authentication, public key authentication, and also certificate authentication. And I will show you all of this when I do the live demo. All right, so I'm going to get into the demo, but just to briefly talk about what I will be doing in the demo, I'm going to show first the VFTP visibility on the user interface. Thereafter, show you a regular FTP batch job. So everybody's used this on today's webinar, unsecured, so not going to spend too much time on that. Then use the same batch job, but just show you how I've converted that batch job to SFTP command syntax. And this highlights the changes to a batch job, assuming that you were tasked to migrate from FTP to SFTP. Then the same FTP batch job set up to use the SSH SOX proxy, illustrating the Node.jl changes to the batch job. So there is some work required, obviously identifying a batch job and also the client that you want to test with. You have to upload that public key if the public keys authentication is the route you want to go. A few minor work to be done, also configuring the proxy. And once that is done, it's a matter of you just choosing which batch jobs you want to run, and then you will be able to have the seamless migration. So let's get to the presentation. I've logged on to VFTP with my user ID, my RACF user ID and password. I'm a administrator on the product, so that allows me to configure the product. There are different other user types. So a super user would be somebody perhaps in your help desk that has access to all FTP, so they could help folks if there's any problems on the FTP, or maybe just outsource it to your development team where they can only view FTPs that's relevant to their user ID. So that would just be a regular user. I've chosen to run the protection mechanism query. So these are typically the standard queries that get shipped with the product. What you can do is, if you want to, you can be a bit more granular and write your own queries if you want, and also save them as favorites for other people to view. But for now, I've selected to run the protection mechanism query for the last 8 hours. Let's shorten the time. Let's go for the last 4 hours. Let's hit the get button. And now you can see the breakdown of the FTP traffic types here on the STS environment. So it's running on a server, a web server. The database product comes with the product, so it's not something additional you have to purchase. It's a Derby database. If you want to have more information on that, we can certainly provide you with that. But here you can see there's some traffic types. Looks like FTP to SFTP conversion over the last 4 hours. There's been 16 of them. There's some that has been running unsecured, and we also have some that is using SSH. So what you can do is you can click on that number. It'll break it out and show me the 17 transfers that's transpired over the last 4 hours. Just by leaving your cursor on any one of these fields, it'll give you some more detail as to the success of this FTP. Using the slider bar on the right hand, on the middle of your screen, you can drag it to the right and you can get some additional information. But now I'm just electing to view this one FTP transfer. There you can see some information about it. Because we have our VFTP client wrap in place, I can now view the context of this FTP transfer. So really nice, very simple to use. Not a lot of training required on VFTP, but it's just a matter of you selecting what you want. So here you can see the context of this particular transfer. Let's go back and view one more. Let's have a look at some of the SSH transfers, and I'm just going to select one here. Let's look at the details of this one. Stu spoke about this as well. Do you know what ciphers are being used? Here you can see exactly what cipher is being used, AES-128. Also on the SSH product, pretty easy to configure what ciphers you want used, and that is something that is set up in the configuration file when you install the product. So let's move along. I just want to show you a few more other queries that you can run. Remember, I spoke about that customer that identified almost 1 terabyte worth of FTP transfers. This is the transfer he ran. Let's run it for a longer period of time. Let's go for the last 5 days. Hit the get button, and now you can see the breakdown of the traffic. All of the folks that came to the STS mainframe either stored or got a file from the mainframe. And again, the same applies, just a matter of clicking on that, and now you can see there's the user ID and get some idea as to what this particular person was doing. From a batch point of view, do you know what batch is running in your environment over the last 5 days? That looks like the file name that I've run, so let's run another one called job name, which will show us the batch jobs. There's all the batch jobs that's run over the last 5 days. I'm just going to shorten this and let's go for the last 4 hours. Let's go with user ID just to give you a feel for what user IDs were accessing the mainframe using FTP. You can see the 10 largest, 10 longest, secured versus unsecured. And then lastly, I just want to show you if for those folks, the really folks that want to write their own queries, perhaps you want to write one. And let me just give you an example. Very simple to do. I've coded up one called a sample network query. In this particular one, I said that the remote IP of the transfer should be 172.* or 10.31.* or 10.14.* and here you can see the criteria for this user-defined query that I've set up. I can save this as a favorite and run it. I've also said that I'm only interested in the start time between 11 and 12, and also the local user ID should be any one of these user IDs. And I've also chosen to say which LPARs I want to get information on. So pretty cool, very easy to do. Let's save and run this and let's see if I get information. Looks like I did get some information from the 10.31 LPAR. Okay, so that's the visibility piece. As I mentioned to you, there's the old question is how can you secure something if you cannot see it? So certainly VFTP is going to provide you with that visibility. Let's move along, and I want to now go concentrate and show you the capability of using VFTP with SSH, how you can migrate your unsecured batch to SFTP. So I've got a bunch of different rules set up. I've gone to the VFTP client configuration. These rules do different things. I'm going to select one which I use for demo purposes. I will select the one called FTP SFTP3. So I want you to remember that because I want to point that out later on in the demonstration. Right now it's only applying for an agent that's running on an LPAR called STS1, but if I wanted to, I could make it a global rule. And it's also applying to a batch job that is called ZVFTP job star. So anything that matches this filter, when the batch job runs, VFTP will intercept it, send it to the proxy, and the proxy will configure it. And bear in mind, we have done some configuration, like I mentioned, we have done some configuration in the background to get the proxy up and working. There's some additional information required in your FTP.data. I've chosen to use an external one. Most customers choose to use the existing FTP.data. That way you don't have to make any JCL changes as well. The two parameters I'm talking about is the firewall operand and also, the firewall friendly operand must be set to true, and also the SOCKS configuration file, which basically says what IP addresses are eligible to be routed to the proxy. So once that is set up, make sure to enable the sessions for this job step must run across a SOCKS proxy. Okay, so we're all set. I've committed the rule. I'm all ready to go. Let's switch to TSO and let's go and have a look at a few of those batch jobs. So firstly, to show you, I've got the SSH product up and running. It's listening on port 22. Bear in mind that SSH is not just for outgoing transfers or SFTP. It is also for inbound as well. So if you have folks that's connecting from your remote network into the mainframe, they will connect to port 22 and be able to store files using SFTP. Well, I've also got the proxy running. We've got more than one running, obviously for test purposes. So I'm ready. Let's go to our JCL and have a look at that. So this firstly is regular FTP. Everybody's seen this. I'm sending to this IP address. That's the user ID and the password. I'm changing to the directory, and that's the name of the file I'm transferring, and I'm calling it unsecured text on the remote end. So I'm not going to spend any time on this. I'll submit that, and we'll look at that later. Let's move along and let's go and look at another one. In fact, let's go back to this one over here. So this is the exact same batch job. All I've done here is I've converted this batch job and I'm now using some SFTP command syntax. So bear in mind I'm using the SSH tier product, and this is what it would look like if I converted it to straight SFTP. You can see we're using a different protocol, SCPG3, or the program is being called is different. I'm using a password file, so that's the prefix, and this particular file is what I've chosen to use. There you can see the FT advice string, which I spoke about, doing some conversion for me. And I'm also saying that it's an MVS data set, and that's the data set. And I'm sending it to this IP address, doing a CD to the upload directory, and I'm storing this as sftp.txt. So it gives you a little idea as to what is required if you are going to be running this as a straight SFTP. So we'll let that run, and we're going to have a look at that output later. Then lastly, or more importantly, I would like to show you what VFTP and SSH is all about. So same batch job. The only thing that you must remember is, remember we had this filter set up, ZFTP batch job or ZFTP, and I'm now ready, straight regular FTP. I'm going to send it the exact same file. I'm just calling it something different on the remote end. So let's run this particular batch job, and I would like to go and examine this batch job. That's my SFTP batch job that is ended, and let's go there and go and have a look at the output. So switch to STSF, and remember my batch job was called ZFTP batch job. There it is running, and I'd like to point out a few things to you within this batch job. So there is some additional information inside of here because our VFTP client is being invoked. But what I would like to point out to you first is the job name is ZFTP job. There it's applying the rule. Remember FTP, SFTP3 one is the one that I set up on the VFTP client. And now you can see it's connecting to the remote end. The proxies got involved and says, all right, I know about this batch job. This is the batch job that I need to convert from FTP to SFTP. And I've configured the proxy to do that. Logs on with user ID and password, and does a store of the file for me remotely. And what I'd like to point out to you again is I did not need to make any JCL changes. All I did was configure the batch job on VFTP and telling VFTP that this batch job is eligible to be routed to the proxy. So let's go and have a look at the output on VFTP firstly, and then thereafter I'll show you the files on the remote end just to show you that they have been delivered. So I'm going to go to again to the protection mechanism query, and let's go for the last hour because my batch jobs ran in that particular time frame. So there's the FTP SFTP one. Let's click on that one. That's my user ID, and now I can see some of the information about this, but I'd like to point out the information inside of the session log, and it's again what you saw inside of the batch job. There you can see the exact same information, and this particular batch job was secured. So that's the highlight of the solution is you don't have to make any JCL changes. If you've got the SSH tier product running with the proxy and the proxy has been configured, your regular FTP batch jobs can be secured using the SSH product, and you don't have to make any JCL changes. So lastly, I'd just like to go to the file. In fact, let me just do a little refresher, and I would like to show you where am I logged on here? Just going to log on again. I don't think I'm logged on to the server site manager. And this is the one that I need to connect to. And let's go there. And there you can see, there's my file. So there's the FTP-SSH proxy. Remember that was it was called in the proxy job. There's the SFTP text and also the unsecured one. So all good, all information. You can see that the files have been stored, and that's pretty much what the solution is all about. So as I mentioned previously, it's a pretty complex task. We can certainly reach, if you want to have more information or set up a one-on-one, we can certainly do that for you and talk about your requirements. And also, we do offer free proof of concepts if you want to evaluate the software. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. I'm now going to hand it over to Yvonne to field some of those questions. Thanks, everyone.